What's up, people? I was having a conversation with someone and we were talking about doing things with the least amount of work involved. So that got me thinking, I want to make a video. So today, this video is about the path of least resistance. This video is to highlight the concept and the ideology behind the path of the least resistance. Lately, a few colleagues of mine, we were talking about this concept as it pertains to the management of employees, the kids, and even spouses. Today, we're going to be scanning the pros and the cons of the path of least resistance. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This it? This Hulu? This Hulu? Yup. Yup. Yo, this Hulu? Hulu has live sports? Bro, what is this? What am I gonna do with this? Hulu has live sports. Yeah, Hulu has live sports. Hulu has live sports. So the path of least resistance, what is it? It's a mentality or a choice that will lead to the least amount of obstacles on your way to the goal. It might not be the most economically sound or even may yield the best results, but the main consideration on the path of least resistance is tension or obstacles or problems. The tension might require a person to do something that he or she is not comfortable doing, or they might have to make a choice that conflicts with who they are. Basically, the path of least resistance is about creating as few problems as possible while hopefully achieving the desired outcome. Now, I'm not one for working foolishly or working hard unnecessarily, but I do very much believe in hard work. I do believe that hard work pays off in the long run. But the ideology here is that one can achieve the same amount of success as hard work with the least amount of resistance and the least amount of obstacles. Even as mentioned on several psychology websites, including psychologytoday.com, we're naturally wired to take the path of least resistance. Why? Almost everything in nature does the same exact thing. Water takes the path of least resistance on its way down. Electricity takes the path of least resistance when it's running through the circuitry. Even the process of evolution in animals. Wolves evolved to dogs because it was easier for them to feed off of the scraps of humans than it was for them to actually hunt and kill prey. But the truth is, the path of least resistance can become a habitual pattern because we tend to choose the path that is the easiest or causes the least amount of pain. The truth about the path of least resistance is that when you want to do something that could potentially cause problems, waiting or diverting it only makes things worse. Let's look at this in an employment environment. Let's say the director wants to write up an insubordinate employee. Basically, the director is beating around the bush and making excuses as to why he won't write up the employee. He's avoiding conflict, he's avoiding tension, he's avoiding that confrontation that's unnecessary if the employee is insubordinate. Now, what will happen in the future if the director does not reprimand the employee? Number one, from the employee standpoint, they're going to think that it's acceptable to continue this behavior. Why? Because when people are not reprimanded or put in their place, just like children, if we were not reprimanded in a certain way or put in line as children, then we think that certain behaviors are okay. In the case of the employee and the director is not reprimanding the employee for being insubordinate. Therefore, the employee is going to continue this path of being insubordinate until it becomes a bigger problem. Or maybe that the director is going to have to fire him because it's just too much, it's just overwhelming. From the director's standpoint, the director does not want to cause the conflict with the employee. Why? Either because A, the employee is a good worker, but he's insubordinate. B, the employee is very outspoken and it could be a potential conflict that the director doesn't want to have. Or C, there's a variety of things when you choose the path of least resistance. Even if we look at it on a personal standpoint,
like parents to children. Some parents don't necessarily believe in disciplining their children, and this could be the path of least resistance. What is the pros and the cons to that? Well, the pros is that the children don't live in a world full of restriction. They're able to do what they want. They don't see limitations. They just are free. They're able to be themselves. They're not really restricted to the expectations of society. Now, the cons to it is that sometimes children who are not disciplined lack self-respect. Sometimes they lack respect for others. Sometimes they're not as considerate for others because they're used to getting their way. They're used to doing whatever they want to do, and they have no regard for anybody else. So there's a pro and a con to taking the path of least resistance. Now, lastly, what we're going to do, I gave you a couple examples. What we're going to do, we're actually going to get into the pros and cons of the path of least resistance. So let's start with the pros. First, pro number one, taking the path of least resistance can avoid unnecessary conflict. The second pro of taking the path to least resistance, it can take the most simplistic method or the most simplistic path to any given issue. The third pro of taking the path of least resistance is that it can remove unnecessary thoughts, overthinking, or any negative thought patterns in order to get to the path of least resistance. The fourth, to springboard off the last pro of the path of least resistance, is that it can remove any alternates or any other methods of doing something. This prevents overthinking, this prevents looking at too many details, this prevents even not making a decision, being indecisive. And the last pro of taking the path of least resistance is that it can make things that are tough seem more easy. So, say for instance, you have a friend that you would like to confront about a situation. If confrontation is not your strong suit, then taking the path of least resistance to get to the desired goal, which is to ask the difficult question or bring the conflict up, would be better. So if you make a joke, if you have someone do it for you, there's a lot of ways that you can go about that specific example to the path of least resistance. Now let's look at the cons of the path of least resistance. Number one con of taking the path of least resistance is that it does not guard against the pitfalls of doing things with the least resistance. The second thing is that it can cause a false sense of safety. The third thing is that it does not allow the natural flow of life, and it does not allow the existence of the obstacles. The fourth con is that it could potentially make smaller problems bigger problems down the line or in the future. The fifth or last con of taking the path of least resistance is that it can make easy things more difficult and the more difficult things nearly impossible to complete. Now, we just outlined a basis of 5 pros and 5 cons on taking the path of least resistance. Now, even though we're hardwired to do the easy thing, to take the easy way out, to do what's easy in life, psychologists, sociologists, and people who study human nature, the majority of them recommend not taking the path of least resistance. Why? Because we have to always understand that life does have conflict. Life does have difficult things that we're going to have to overcome and that we're going to have to deal with, whether it be our friends, our family members, strangers, co-workers, whomever they may be, or whatever the difficult path may be. We have to learn how to take the path of resistance in order to get to our desired goal, sometimes because in the end we learn more about ourselves from conflict than we do through taking the easy way out. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. Leave a comment in the section below. Tell me if you think that taking the path of least resistance is smart, why or why not. If you typically take the path of least resistance when dealing with friends, co-workers, family, spouse, etc., etc., and you know the deal. Subscribe, CinaMatics Media, CinaMatics Music, CinaMatics Photography.